The massive chamber on Xerion Prime buzzed with alien voices as representatives from 12 different worlds gathered around the circular table. The air shimmered with translation fields, allowing dozens of species to communicate despite their vastly different languages. Today's meeting had one simple purpose: deciding whether to accept humanity into the Galactic Council. Ambassador Veltar of the Hegemony stood at the center, his forearms gesturing dramatically as he projected holographic images into the air. "Look at these creatures," he said, his voice dripping with disdain. "They call themselves humans and they want to join our advanced civilization." The first image showed a human city during rush hour. Thousands of people moved through crowded streets, pushing and shoving to get to work. To the aliens watching, it looked like chaos. The Zephyrians, whose crystal bodies reflected light in beautiful patterns, made clicking sounds of disapproval. Their own cities were perfectly organized, with every citizen moving in harmony like parts of a great machine. "Notice how disorganized they are," Veltar continued. "No structure, no efficiency. They waste energy on pointless activities." The next image showed humans at a sports stadium, screaming and cheering for their teams. They become violent over games. What kind of advanced species does this? General Thane of the Arcturus Federation leaned forward in his floating chair. His massive frame and scarred hide told the story of countless battles across the galaxy. "Show us their military capabilities," he rumbled. "That's what really matters." Veltar smiled, revealing rows of sharp teeth. "Oh, this is the best part." The hologram changed to show human soldiers in combat. They carried primitive projectile weapons and moved without the grace of other species' warriors. "Look at how they fight. No energy shields, no plasma weapons, no coordinated battle formations. They just run around shooting metal bullets at each other." The Corvanth Collective's representative, a being that looked like a walking tree with dozens of eyes, rustled its branches in what passed for laughter among its kind. "Their weapons are so basic. We stopped using solid projectiles thousands of years ago. Do they still throw rocks at their enemies too?" More images flashed across the hologram. Human wars throughout history appeared one after another. Ancient battles with swords and shields, medieval sieges with catapults, modern conflicts with tanks and aircraft. Each image drew more mocking sounds from the assembled aliens. "They fight each other constantly," Veltar explained. "Not over resources or territory like civilized species, but over ideas. They call it religion, politics, philosophy. They will kill millions of their own kind because they disagree about invisible concepts." A delegate from the aquatic Nereids raised a webbed hand. "Surely they have some redeeming qualities. The Council requires unanimous approval to reject a species entirely." Veltar's expression grew more serious. "They have one trait that concerns me. They don't know when to quit." He showed footage of human soldiers continuing to fight even when badly wounded, of rescue workers running into burning buildings to save strangers, of explorers pushing into deadly environments just to see what was there. "This isn't bravery. It's stupidity. They're too primitive to understand when they're beaten." The chamber fell quiet as the aliens processed this information. Finally, Councillor Jaira of the Ethereal Conclave spoke. Her translucent form flickered as she communicated, through light patterns. "Their emotional instability makes them unpredictable. Unpredictable allies are dangerous allies." "I agree," said General Thane. "Look at their battle tactics." The hologram showed human military exercises. No formation discipline. Their soldiers break ranks to help wounded comrades instead of completing the mission. They make decisions based on feelings rather than logic. Any competent enemy could exploit this weakness easily. The discussion continued for hours. Each delegate found new reasons to mock humanity's application. The Vex Consortium's representative pointed out that humans still used chemical fuels for space travel instead of antimatter drives. The Silicon Mines calculated that human technology was at least 500 years behind the galactic standard. "They sent us samples of their art and culture," added Veltar, displaying human paintings, music and literature. "Look at this chaos. No mathematical precision, no perfect symmetry. They create things simply because they enjoy them, not because they serve any practical purpose." The Crystalline Unity's delegate resonated with disapproval. Inefficient resource allocation. They waste time and materials on unnecessary aesthetic pursuits, while their people still suffer from disease and poverty. As the day wore on, the verdict became clear. Not a single delegate spoke in favor of granting humans full membership in the Galactic Council. The formal vote was merely a formality, 12-0 against admission, with several delegates suggesting that humanity wasn't even ready for observer status. Let them play in their small corner of space, General Thane concluded. Maybe in a few thousand years they'll develop into something resembling a civilized species. Until then, they're more likely to hurt themselves than anyone else. The transmission was sent to Earth immediately. Ambassador Hana Kim received the message at the human embassy on Luna Station. As she read the Council's decision, she felt a familiar anger building in her chest. The same anger her ancestors had felt when others underestimated them. She walked to the observation deck and looked out at Earth, hanging like a blue jewel in space. Somewhere down there, soldiers were training, engineers were building, scientists were discovering, and none of them had any idea how completely the galaxy had just dismissed their potential. "You have no idea what you've just done," she whispered to the stars. 3 months after the Council's rejection of humanity, deep space monitoring stations across the galaxy began picking up strange signals. The readings didn't match any known ship designs or energy signatures in the galactic database. Long-range sensors showed massive objects moving through the void between stars, but they were still too far away to identify clearly. On the peaceful world of Tiran, a Zephyrian scientist named Kethmore was the first to realize what they were seeing. His crystalline form pulsed with alarm as he studied the sensor data. The objects were ships, but they were enormous, each one larger than the biggest space stations the Council had ever built. Their hulls seemed to be made of some kind of living metal that shifted and changed as he watched. "Impossible," Kethmore whispered to his colleagues. "Nothing that size should be able to move through space. The energy requirements would be—" His words were cut off as the lead ship suddenly accelerated, moving faster than any vessel in the known galaxy. Within hours, the massive fleet had crossed distances that should have taken weeks. They were heading straight for Council space. Admiral Teclon of the Hegemony Navy was commanding the border patrol when the first contact occurred. His sleek warships moved in perfect formation, their weapons powered but not yet aimed at the approaching strangers. Standard protocol required peaceful first contact attempts, even with unknown species. "Unknown vessels, this is Admiral Teclon of the Galactic Council Defense Force," he broadcast on all frequencies. "Please identify yourselves and state your intentions. We welcome peaceful visitors to our space." The response came in the form of a plasma beam that cut his flagship in half. The other ships in his squadron barely had time to raise their shields before the attack continued. Energy weapons unlike anything in the Council's arsenal tore through their defenses like paper. Within minutes, the entire patrol was destroyed. Simende. Survivors' emergency transmissions reached Council headquarters on Xerion Prime, just as the invasion fleet entered the outer systems. The messages were confused and panicked, describing weapons that adapted to their defenses in real time and ships that seemed to repair themselves even while under fire. General Thane immediately mobilized the full Council Defense Force. Thousands of ships from dozens of worlds converged on the invasion route, forming the largest military fleet in galactic history. The general was confident that overwhelming numbers would stop any threat, no matter how advanced their technology might be. The Vorthan Empire had finally arrived. Their ships were nightmares of biological and mechanical fusion. Living metal hulls pulsed like heartbeats, while weapon systems that looked like giant insects crawled across their surfaces. The Vorthans themselves were massive creatures covered in natural armor, with 4 arms that ended in claws capable of tearing through steel. They had conquered 17 galaxies before setting their sights on this one. The first major battle took place at Corvain Prime, homeworld of the Corvanth Collective. The tree-like aliens had prepared defensive positions across their planets, surface confident that their hive-mind coordination would allow them to respond to any attack. They were wrong. Vorthan ground forces landed in organic pods that burrowed into the planet's crust, before releasing their occupants. The invaders didn't fight like any species the Corvanth had ever encountered. Instead of organized formations, they moved like predators, using the planet's forests and cities as hunting grounds. The Corvanth's hive mind, which had been their greatest strength, became their weakness. When one Corvanth felt fear, they all felt it. When one died screaming, they all heard it. Within days, the entire species was paralyzed by terror, unable to mount any effective resistance. The Zephyrian homeworld fell next, their beautiful crystal. Cities built with mathematical precision over thousands of years were reduced to rubble in hours. The Zephyrians' advanced technology proved useless against enemies who treated each battle as a separate puzzle to solve. Every defensive system the crystals deployed was analyzed, countered, and destroyed by the adaptive Vorthan war machines. One by one, the Council's member worlds sent out desperate calls for help. The proud hegemony, which had ruled 3-star systems for millennia, watched their capital burn as Vorthan forces landed on their sacred homeworld. The aquatic Nereids found their ocean cities boiling, as strange weapons turned their peaceful seas into death traps. The ethereal conclave, beings of pure energy, who had thought themselves immune to physical attack, discovered that the Vorthans possessed weapons designed specifically to disrupt their energy forms. Ancient species that had survived for millions of years were wiped out in days. General Thane's massive fleet met the main Vorthan force at the Nexus Point, a strategic location that controlled access to the galaxy's core worlds. The battle lasted only 6 hours. Council ships, despite their superior numbers, were systematically destroyed by enemies who seemed to learn from every attack. The Vorthan's adaptive technology turned the Council's own weapons against them, while their biological ships regenerated damage faster than it could be inflicted. In his final transmission before his flagship was destroyed, General Thane spoke words that no one had ever expected to hear from the proud warrior. "We need help. Send word to everyone. The outer colonies, the independent systems, even the primitives. Anyone who can fight must come now, or we're all going to die." The message was broadcast across the galaxy on all emergency frequencies. On distant monitoring stations, forgotten species received the call for aid. Pirates, rebels, isolationists, everyone who had been ignored or rejected by the Council heard the same desperate plea. On Earth, Admiral Do-hyun Park stood in the command center at Lunar Base, watching the tactical display as red markers showed the advancing Vorthan fleet. His staff waited silently, knowing that humanity had no obligation to help the Council that had dismissed them so completely. Park studied the enemy's movements for several minutes before speaking. "Gentlemen," he said quietly, "it appears that Galaxy needs to learn what humans do when innocent people are in danger." Within 72 hours of receiving the Council's desperate plea, something extraordinary happened across Earth. Every military base, space dock, and shipyard burst into activity. Admiral Do-hyun Park had given a single order: mobilize everything that could fly and fight. The response was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. At the lunar shipyards, Chief Engineer Minji Lee watched as civilian vessels lined up for military conversion. Cargo haulers designed to carry grain and manufactured goods were being fitted with armor plating and weapon systems. Mining ships that had spent decades breaking apart asteroids received military-grade missiles. Even luxury cruise liners were transformed into troop carriers, their elegant ballrooms converted to barracks. "Sir, are you sure about this?" asked Lieutenant Commander Taeho Choi, staring at the massive passenger ship being welded with gun turrets. "These ships weren't built for combat. Half of them will fall apart under the stress of battle." Minji looked at the young officer and smiled grimly. "That's the point, Lieutenant. The aliens expect us to fight like them, with perfect ships and perfect formations. They're about to learn that humans don't need perfect equipment to win." The Earth Defense Fleet that emerged from human space was a sight that would have made any military strategist weep. Nothing matched. Sleek military destroyers flew alongside converted garbage scows. Ancient warships pulled from museums served next to experimental prototypes. Some vessels still bore the names of their civilian origins. The cargo ship Happy Merchant now bristled with enough weapons to level a city. Admiral Park commanded from the bridge of the UES Defiance, a massive battleship that looked like it had been assembled from spare parts. In reality, it had been built using the combined technologies of every human nation, incorporating lessons learned from centuries of warfare. Its hull was covered in reactive armor that could absorb tremendous punishment, while its weapons systems included everything from railguns to nuclear missiles. The human fleet jumped into hyperspace just as news arrived that the Vortan forces had reached Korith Prime, the last major council stronghold. Alien refugees were streaming away from the planet in every direction, their ships overloaded with survivors. The Vortan invasion fleet hung in orbit like a collection of living nightmares, their biomechanical hulls pulsing with malevolent energy. Captain Sujin Kang, commanding the converted mining vessel Rockbreaker, was among the first to engage the enemy. Her ship had been designed to crack asteroids open, and she intended to find out if Vortan armor was tougher than space rock. "All ships, this is Admiral Park," came the voice over the communication system. "Remember what we talked about. These aliens think they understand warfare because they've conquered 17 galaxies. They're about to learn the difference between conquest and fighting humans." The human fleet didn't approach in the neat formations that other species used. Instead, they spread out across the entire system, coming at the Vortans from dozens of different angles. Some ships moved fast and light, darting between enemy vessels like angry hornets. Others came in slow and heavy, their massive hulls absorbing punishment, while their weapons charged for devastating strikes. The Vorthans had adapted to every type of warfare they'd encountered, but they had never faced anything like this. Their biomechanical computers tried to analyze the human attack patterns and found only chaos. Ships that should have retreated when damaged instead rammed into Vortan vessels, their crews detonating their own reactors to take enemies with them. Lieutenant Eugene Park led the first boarding action against a Vortan command ship. Her Marines had trained for this moment by studying every human conflict in history, from ancient sword fights to modern urban warfare. They moved through the alien ship like ghosts, using tactics that the Vortans had never encountered. The coup. Vortans were physically stronger and better armed, but they fought like machines, efficient, logical, predictable. The human Marines fought like humans, creative, adaptable, and absolutely refusing to give up. When their weapons ran out of ammunition, they used Vortan equipment against its owners. When their equipment failed, they fought with improvised weapons made from ship components. Sergeant Boram Song's squad became legends in the first hour of fighting. Cut off in the engine section of a Vortan destroyer, they managed to turn the ship's own power systems against the crew. Using knowledge gained from decades of human engineering, they caused cascading failures that left the massive vessel dead in space. "How did they do that?" asked a Vortan commander, watching his ship's systems fail in ways that shouldn't have been possible. "Their technology is primitive. They shouldn't understand our systems." What the Vorthans didn't realize was that human engineers had been making impossible repairs and modifications for centuries. They approached every problem with the assumption that there had to be a solution, even if it meant completely ignoring the manufacturer's specifications. The battle raged for 18 hours. Human ships continued fighting even when their hulls were breached and their life support was failing. Crews worked in vacuum suits, manually loading weapons and steering their vessels toward enemy targets. The converted cargo ship Lucky Strike continued firing its weapons even after its bridge had been destroyed, its crew operating from the engine room using improvised controls. By the time the Vortan fleet retreated from Korith Prime, they had learned something that no species in 17 galaxies had taught them. There was a difference between defeating an enemy and facing an opponent who simply refused to be defeated. Admiral Park stood on his bridge, looking at the tactical display that showed human vessels scattered across the system. Half of his fleet was damaged or destroyed, but they had achieved something impossible. They had forced the Vorthans to retreat. "Sir," said his communications officer, "we're receiving messages from across the galaxy. Every species that's been hiding from the Vorthans wants to know the same thing. Who are these humans? And how did they do what the entire Galactic Council couldn't?" Park smiled and opened a channel to the entire fleet. "All ships, prepare for the next engagement. It's time to show the galaxy what humans do when someone threatens innocent people." The war had spread across 6 star systems, and the galaxy watched in amazement as human forces continued to push back the seemingly unstoppable Vorthan Empire. What they witnessed challenged everything they thought they knew about warfare. Admiral Jin Woo Han commanded the 3rd Human Fleet from his flagship, a converted ore hauler called Iron Will. The ship looked like a flying scrapyard to alien observers, with armor plating welded over cargo holds and weapons mounted wherever they could fit. But Han had chosen it specifically because the Vorthans would underestimate its capabilities. "Sir, the Vorthan fleet is moving into position at Theta Station," reported his tactical officer. "They're using the same formation that destroyed the Hegemony's 7th Fleet last week." Han studied the display, showing enemy ships arranged in a perfect defensive sphere around the space station. It was a formation that had proven unbreakable against traditional tactics. Every other species had tried to penetrate it using coordinated assaults and had failed miserably. "Signal all ships," Han ordered. "Execute Pattern Chaos 7. What happened next would be studied in military academies for generations. Instead of attacking as a unified force, the human ships scattered in seemingly random directions. Some vessels flew straight at the enemy formation, while others curved away at impossible angles. A few ships even appeared to be flying backward, their weapons firing behind them as they retreated. The Vortan commanders watched in confusion as their adaptive computers tried to predict the human attack pattern. Every time they thought they understood what the humans were doing, half the fleet would suddenly change direction. Ships that had been retreating would spin around and charge directly into Vorthan formations. Vessels that appeared damaged would suddenly reveal hidden weapons systems. Captain Hyun-Soo Lim piloted his fighter squadron through the chaos with deadly precision. His ships were modified civilian craft, racing vessels and personal shuttles that had been armed with whatever weapons could fit. They moved through the battle like a swarm of angry insects, too small and fast for the Vorthan weapons to track effectively. "Remember," Lim told his pilots, "we're not trying to destroy their big ships. We're trying to make them angry enough to make mistakes." The human fighters darted between massive Vortan vessels, firing at sensor arrays and communication systems. When the aliens tried to swat them with point defense weapons, the fighters would disappear into asteroid fields or behind space debris, only to emerge somewhere else entirely. On the ground, the war was even more brutal. Colonel So-Young Kim led human forces on the industrial world of Mechanicus, where Vorthan troops had established what they believed was an impregnable fortress in the planet's main manufacturing complex. The Vorthans had learned to expect human ground attacks to be chaotic and unpredictable, but they still fought like machines, efficient, logical, and by the book. Kim's forces had studied every human conflict in history, from ancient guerrilla wars to modern urban combat, and they brought all of that knowledge to bear against their alien enemies. "Sir, the Vorthans have motion sensors covering every approach." "To the factory," reported Lieutenant Min-Ho Lee, studying reconnaissance data. "They'll detect any large force moving toward their position." Kim smiled as she reviewed the battle plans. "Then we won't move a large force. We'll move 100 small ones." What followed was unlike anything the Vorthans had encountered in 17 galaxies of conquest. Human soldiers appeared everywhere at once, crawling through maintenance tunnels, rappelling down ventilation shafts, even hiding inside delivery vehicles that the aliens had assumed were harmless. Every entrance to the facility was simultaneously breached by small teams that moved like shadows through the complex. The Vorthans found themselves fighting an enemy that seemed to be everywhere and nowhere. Human soldiers would appear, strike at critical systems, and then vanish before reinforcements could arrive. They used the factory's own machinery against its occupiers, turning assembly lines into traps and industrial equipment into weapons. Sergeant Yoonji Park's team became masters of improvised warfare. When they ran out of standard ammunition, they loaded the factory's metal stamping machines with scrap metal and turned them into giant shotguns. When the Vorthans cut power to sections of the facility, the humans used emergency lighting and their own equipment to create a network of mirrors that let them communicate through light signals. "These creatures are insane," reported a Vorthan field commander to his superiors. "They fight in environments that should kill them. They use weapons that shouldn't work. They refuse to surrender even when victory is impossible. The Vorthan commander was referring to the battle at Firebase Delta, where Major Jae Sung-Oh's battalion had held their position for 6 days against overwhelming odds. The humans had turned a simple supply depot into a fortress using nothing but ingenuity and determination. When their walls were breached, they fought from the rubble. When their ammunition ran low, they used enemy weapons. When their communications were cut, they continued fighting as independent units. But perhaps the most disturbing thing for the Vorthans was how human forces seemed to learn from every engagement. Tactics that worked once against human troops never worked again. The aliens would develop a new weapon or strategy, use it successfully in one battle, and then find it completely useless in the next engagement. Commander Wei Han Yun exemplified this adaptability during the space battle at Proxima Junction, when Vortan ships began using a new type of energy weapon that could penetrate human shields. Yun's engineering teams worked frantically to develop countermeasures. Within hours, they had modified their ship's deflector arrays to actually absorb and redirect the alien energy. "Impossible," transmitted the Vorthan fleet commander as his own weapons were turned against him. How did they adapt so quickly? It should take months to develop effective countermeasures. The answer lay in humanity's greatest strength, their refusal to accept limitations. While other species would spend weeks studying new alien technology, through proper scientific channels, human engineers would take captured equipment apart with hammers and screwdrivers, figure out how it worked, and then build something better in their garage. General Thane, the same alien officer who had dismissed human capabilities months earlier, now found himself studying human tactics with grudging respect. "They don't fight to win," he observed to his staff. "They fight as if losing isn't an option. There's a difference, and it's terrifying." The final battle was about to begin. The Vorthan Empire had retreated to their massive fortress world, a mobile planet covered in weapons that could destroy entire star systems. For weeks, the combined fleets of every remaining galactic species had tried to breach its defenses. Each assault ended in catastrophic failure, with entire fleets vaporized before they could get close enough to do any damage. Admiral Sujin Kang stood on the bridge of her flagship, Eternal Defiance, studying the tactical display that showed the Vorthan stronghold. The fortress world was twice the size of Earth's moon, its surface bristling with energy cannons that had already claimed thousands of ships. Around it orbited a defensive fleet of biomechanical vessels, each one capable of taking on an entire human squadron, Admiral, reported her communications officer. "The Council fleets are requesting our battle plan. They want to coordinate another joint assault." Kang shook her head. "Tell them to hold position and watch. We're going to show them something new." The human fleet that approached the Vorthan fortress looked nothing like the organized formations of other species. Ships spread out across the entire system in what appeared to be complete chaos. Some vessels flew directly toward the enemy stronghold, while others moved in wide circles. A few ships even appeared to be running away from the battle entirely. Captain Dongwu Shin commanded one of the retreating vessels, a converted mining ship called Lucky Break. His crew had spent days preparing for this moment, filling their cargo holds with specialized equipment that would have seemed like junk to any other species. "Captain," asked his nervous gunner, "are you sure this plan will work? We're flying straight into the most heavily defended position in the galaxy." Shin smiled as he watched the fortress's massive weapons tracking other human vessels. "That's exactly what makes it perfect. They expect us to be afraid of their big guns." The Vorthan defenders had adapted to every type of assault they'd encountered, but the human approach confused their tactical computers. Ships that should have been destroyed by the fortress's weapons somehow survived direct hits. Vessels that appeared to be heavily damaged continued fighting with equipment that shouldn't have been functional. Commander In Soo Kim's destroyer, Storm Rider, took a direct hit from a Vorthan energy cannon that should have vaporized it completely. Instead, the ship's experimental armor system absorbed most of the blast and converted it into power for their own weapons. Kim's crew had learned this technique by studying how human cities survived natural disasters, by building structures that bent instead of breaking. "Impossible," transmitted the Vorthan fortress commander. That ship should be destroyed. How is it still fighting? The answer came in the form of return fire that punched through the fortress's outer defenses. Human weapons had been designed with one principle in mind. If something was worth shooting, it was worth shooting with everything you had. The Storm Rider's weapons were a mixture of military-grade missiles, industrial mining lasers, and improvised devices that no engineer would have approved, but somehow worked perfectly. Deep inside the fortress, Vortan soldiers prepared for the inevitable boarding actions. They had repelled every attempt to take their stronghold, using the massive structure's size and complexity to trap invading forces in deadly mazes. But when the human assault teams arrived, they came from directions that should have been impossible. Lieutenant Colonel Yejin Cho led her Marines through what had once been the fortress's water recycling system. Her team moved through pipes and maintenance tunnels that the Vorthans had assumed were too small for armed soldiers. They emerged directly in the fortress's command center, appearing like ghosts behind enemy lines. "Surrender now," Cho announced, to the shocked Vorthan commanders, "and we'll treat you according to the laws of war. Continue fighting and we'll show you why humans are the galaxy's best urban warfare specialists." The Vorthans chose to fight. It was a mistake they would remember for the rest of their very short lives. What followed was 3 days of the most intense combat the galaxy had ever witnessed. Human forces fought through every level of the massive fortress using tactics that seemed to defy logic. They turned the station's own systems against its defenders, using everything from artificial gravity to food processors as weapons. Sergeant Major Kyung Ho Nam's engineering team became legends when they managed to reverse the polarity of the fortress's main power core. The resulting explosion didn't destroy the station, but instead created an electromagnetic pulse that disabled every Vorthan weapon system simultaneously. "How did they do that?" asked General Thane, watching from his command ship as the fortress's lights went dark. That level of technical sabotage should be impossible without years of study. The answer was simple, but terrifying. Humans didn't need to understand how something worked to break it. They approached every problem with the assumption that there had to be a solution, even if that solution involved hitting it with a hammer until it did what they wanted. Captain Sung-Woo Park's final assault on the fortress's core was the moment that ended the war. His team fought through impossible odds to reach the Vorthan command center, where the enemy's supreme commander waited with the last of his guards. "You cannot defeat us," the Vorthan leader declared. "We have conquered 17 galaxies. We are superior to your primitive species in every way." Park looked at the alien commander and smiled. "That's your problem. You think this is about being superior. For us, this is about protecting innocent people, and humans will do anything to protect the innocent." The final battle lasted only minutes. When it was over, the Vorthan commander transmitted his surrender to every ship in the system. The most powerful military force in known space had been defeated by a species that most of the galaxy had considered primitive only months before. In the aftermath, representatives from every surviving species gathered to witness something unprecedented. The Galactic Council formally requesting human membership not as observers, but as the galaxy's primary defense force. Ambassador Hana Kim stood before the assembled delegates, the same aliens who had laughed at humanity's application just a year earlier. "We accept," she said simply, "but understand this. Humans fight to make sure the fight never has to happen again. The galaxy had found its protectors, and they would never make the mistake of underestimating humans again."